In a lot of ways, packet analysis is all about showing the right information at the right time. So when you're doing any type of analysis where you're dealing with a whole lot of data, it's really easy to become overwhelmed by the data, or maybe miss a couple of things you need that could lead you down the right path. And that's what we want to try to avoid. And I think that's really best done in a lot of ways by making effective use of the packet list pane. So this topmost pane here. Now, one of the best ways to do that is to customize the columns you're using to display information. And I think this is an important lesson because not many people realize you can customize these columns, and that's really a great missed opportunity. There are very few packet captures I work with these days that I'm not at least adding one or two columns or removing some columns or doing some type of tweaking to make sure I'm getting the information I need in the packet list. It's a nice tight window of condensed information. If you can get the right stuff in there, you can actually make it to where maybe you don't even need to dig too far into the packet details, which means you're going to have a lot faster analysis if you can just do some simple grouping and sorting or just scrolling through the window and seeing what you need to see. So we'll talk about that a little bit here. Now, if you're looking on the screen, you see that Wireshark has some default columns available. They're going to be there pretty much all the time, and these are for the most part columns I generally always leave enabled. So they're kind of my base set to start with too, which is why they're the defaults. Now at the left, you see we have the number column, which starts at number 1 and goes sequentially. Each packet increments by 1. We have the time column, which shows the relative time. In this case, it's time since the beginning of the capture. So we see that number increasing as we go down. That's adjustable, and we'll talk about that a little later in this section. We have the source and destination IP address. We have the protocol that's being detected by Wireshark's protocol dissectors. We have the length or the size of the packet in bytes. And then we have this catch-all info column, which is showing you basically whatever the individual protocol dissector that's being used, whatever it determines is the most important thing. So in this case, for DNS queries, we see the standard query and the standard query response. For HTTP, we see the GET request here. We see responses to that as well. Here's another GET request. Here's a response right here. So we see the information Wireshark thinks we need to know based upon the protocol dissectors, which generally do a pretty good job. This is a pretty good summary column. Now, you can do some basic things you might expect with these columns. So for instance, I can take this number column and shrink it down to size. I can do the same thing with the time column. I can make it bigger. I can make it smaller by clicking the area between the columns and holding my mouse down and going left and right. Pretty easy. Now, what I can also do here is I can right-click this column, and something I can do is change the alignment, which is kind of nice. So I can click, align left, center, right. Say I want the time centered. So I can right-click that and center it, which is a pretty neat thing to do in terms of getting things to where they're a little easier to read. I kind of honestly like some of these things centered, especially if I have the columns where there might be a little bit bigger. So if you have a source address, I might want to center that or something like that. So you have some options here where you can align things a little bit differently. Now, a nice little feature you can do here is go to this view menu and go ahead and click on resize columns. And what that's going to do, it's going to try to resize your columns in the most efficient way possible so you're not wasting any space. In this case, you'll see that the time column got really, really small, so did source and destination IP address, whereas a lot of room is given to the info column because it's going to have the most amount of data. Now, I don't really like to use this too much. I don't like my source and destination IP address to be jumbled. I think they run too much together with the time column, so I like a little bit of space in between those so that my eyes can visually discern the difference between these columns. While we have color coding that helps us discern the different rows and certainly the highlighting as we go up and down too with my mouse, we don't really have that with the columns. So I do think a little bit of space helps. So I don't use that resize option too much, but it is there if you need it. Another option we have if we right click on any of these column headers is the ability to show or hide columns. So for instance, if I don't want this number column, the packet number column, which I don't use a whole lot, you can just uncheck that and the packet number column goes away. It's small and unobtrusive, so I normally leave it on because if you do need to reference a specific packet, that is a unique number that allows you to do that, especially if you're working on a case or communicating something with other people who are looking at the same capture. That's pretty helpful, and it's ultimately just helpful to be able to know where you're at, and I keep a notebook open and will often write down the packets of interest. So I keep it open most of the time, even though I don't necessarily actively use it as much in the investigation. It's more for reference. That said, you can right click any of these column headings and hide them or show them. Again, you're not deleting anything. That way, it's not like you're clicking the remove this column button where you're actually deleting the ability to have something without adding it back. It's just a toggle to show or hide, which is a nice little feature. Now from there, let's look at some more advanced options. So I'm going to right click again in one of these column headers, and I'm going to tell it to show me the column preferences. Now, column preferences are actually just a tab or an option within the Wireshark preferences screen. You see, we're at Wireshark preferences, and I have the columns option. I could just as easily get there by going to Edit, Preferences, and then choosing Columns, and we get to the same screen. So I'm going to go ahead and resize this and make it just a little bit bigger so you can see what's going on here. And you'll see that we have an entry here for each column in the packet list window. So you see number, time, source, destination, protocol, length, and info. They're all here. In this case, we have this displayed option, which is essentially the same option we're toggling when we chose to show or hide. You don't see that applied in the background because there's no automatic application. You actually have to click OK. But you do have the ability to show or hide from here as well. And you can also actually change the names of things. So I can actually go in here and double click into number and just call it num. If I click that and then click OK, you'll see that NO period was changed to NUM. So I just changed it to num there. So I'm going to go ahead and change that back. Now, one of the cool things you have the ability to do here is also you have the ability to add columns. And this is a really powerful feature that we're going to spend a little bit of time on because I think it's one of the more powerful features in Wireshark. And there are a couple different ways to do it, but the one way to do that is right here on this screen. Now in the packet capture we're working with here, we see that we have a bunch of HTTP packets back there. You see that in the protocol field. So let's one thing that would be neat is the ability to see some more information about the HTTP packets. Let's say as a column. So we want to see, let's say we want to see the request method. So is it a GET request? Are we asking to get data, or is it a POST request? Are we posting data up to the web server? The ability to see that directly in the packet list and scroll through that pretty quickly is a way that's going to tell us a lot more about the capture without having to dig into the individual packets themselves. Now to do that, very simple. I'm just going to click this plus button down at the bottom of the screen. You see it's going to add a new row here. So where it says new column, I'm just going to change that to, we'll just call it method. Pretty straightforward. So I called it method, and I'm going to skip the type field. You can configure that, but it's going to get changed anyway. So I'm going to skip type and go over to fields. And what fields is going to do is it's going to let me essentially specify a field that is identified by a protocol dissector. So you have to know the field name, but fortunately Wireshark has a really neat autocomplete feature. So for instance, if I type H, you see we get everything starting with H. We get every protocol, and you see it uses the dot notation. So it's, in this case we see these H22 protocols. So we see, let's type HT, and we see we have HTTP. So I'm going to type HTTP and hit dot. So we'll learn more about these dissectors and how you use these this nomenclature and filtering later. But for the most part, you have this top-down approach where we have protocol dot field, and if there are subfields, you have another dot. So protocol dot field dot subfield. So I just type HTTP dot, and I see all these different options I have available for the HTTP protocol, and there's certainly a lot of them. Now in this case, I'm concerned about a request method, and so of course I can actually just scroll down and find it. So I see we have request method here. I can also just type it out. So I can just type request, and you see everything for HTTP request. In this case, we're looking at method, which is a subfield of the request. So it's http.request.method. And I just click on that, and you notice the type field changes to custom because we're using an option over in this fields column. But that's gonna put that where we need it. Now, in this case, if I clicked OK, it would put it over to the right. So it would put it over to the right of the info column. So I'm just going to click OK. And if I scroll to the right, well, you can't see that too well. But so let's go back in here. Let's go back in here to preferences, columns, and I'm actually going to change where that is. I'm going to change that. I'm going to click and drag that. We're going to put it right next to, let's put it right before info. So you see there we have method there, and I'm going to hit OK. And now it's a lot easier to see. I couldn't get to the right over there because info was taking up too much room on the screen as I have it laid out. But now that I have method here, we see it's available. I'm going to go ahead and click that and tell it to align center, so it's got a little bit of visual separation there. And then you see I have a get request here. I have a get request here. I can filter that down. Let's just go ahead and filter that by all HTTP requests. And of course, now every one of them has this this method column. And that's pretty cool. That gives me the ability to see what the method is without necessarily like scrolling through all the packets. Now, if you're looking at the same screen I'm looking at, though, you're saying, well, Chris, the method is already in the info column. We see it here. We see the get request is listed there as well. And you're absolutely right. So it's not the most helpful in that sense. So let's go ahead and actually just get rid of it. I'm going to go ahead and remove this column, and it's actually gone now. And let's add something that might be a little bit more useful. So let's go ahead and do this a little bit differently. So instead of going to preferences and doing it that way, I'm going to go ahead and dig around down here in the packet details for one of these packets. So we're filtered to all HTTP requests, which it looks like we have just a few of those here. And what's an interesting field that we can look at? You know, I think something that's interesting is the host field, namely because host isn't given to us in the info column. We have the GET request, we have the HTTP method, and we have the URI that's appended to the end of the host in the request, but we don't have the actual host itself. So why don't we add it? Now, I could go to Edit Preferences, add a new column, http.host, but there's a much quicker way, and this is one of my favorite shortcuts. I can actually go here to Host and right-click it and choose this option for Apply as Column. And watch what happens when I do that. It automatically creates a new column based upon that field, and it's now available on the screen automatically. So I can see, it looks like we have a bunch of requests to ESPN, a couple to one to Optimizely, some to some ESPN content delivery networks, all available there. So now I actually have the host and the HTTP method and the URI all available to me. So I no longer have to click through each packet, go through all of those and look at the host individually. It's all on the screen right there for me, which is a pretty cool thing. And to do that, remember, all I did was find the field I want in the packet details pane, right click it and apply as column, and it gets added to the screen automatically. And I can really do that to as many fields as I like or as many fields as I have room to add. So let's go in here and add the user agent field. So I'll go ahead and right click here, apply as column. So we have user agent here as well. Now, of course, if I scroll to the right, you see things are getting a lot of width. So user agent takes up a lot of room here. So I'm going to go ahead and just shrink that a little bit. That's good enough right there. Let's get everything on the screen. I can also add stuff from other protocols. Remember, we have a lot of different protocols available that are encapsulated here. Let's say I want to add the IP version. So let's apply as column the IP version. And we have that right here now. So we have Internet Protocol version, IP.version is the filter. In this case, it's all IP version 4, which is no surprise in this case. So you can add as many of these as you like. If you decide there's one you don't want, let's say we don't want user agent anymore, I can right click it and either hide it by unchecking user agent or just remove it. And of course, the changes we make, if I go to Edit and Preferences and then Columns, those are available there. So we see those. We see host that I added and version are both there. And if I want, I can click and play with these and change their order. I can move them back and forth, up and down, wherever makes the most sense. Of course, where I just move that maybe doesn't make the most sense. But what you're going to want to do is play with this and try to figure out what works best for the analysis that you're trying to perform. So let's try another practical example based on using this technique. So I'm going to go ahead and clear out the filter that I have applied here. And let's go ahead and get rid of this version column. We'll just right click and remove column. We'll get rid of this host column. And let's remove that. So we're back to basically the default set of columns here. And if I scroll to the top, we're going to see that we have some DNS traffic going on. And DNS traffic is fun to look at. We'll certainly learn more about that later. So I'm going to go ahead and filter all the DNS traffic down just by using the DNS filter in the filter bar. And we have just a few packets. Now in this case, we have a lot of cool information in the info column. It looks like we have a query for ESPN.com. The next packet, we have a response, and it tells us the IP addresses. But are there any columns we can maybe apply here that give us a little bit more information about the DNS queries? You know, one thing that comes to mind for me are the number of queries being asked and the number of responses being given. So I'm going to add 2 fields in this case. If I look at this first request, of course, DNS is a request and response type of protocol, stimulus and response, if you will. So we have questions and answers. That's how DNS works. If I click on this first packet and look at down here at the bottom, we see we have a questions field. And it tells us the number of questions there are. And this is how the system that receives these knows how far to read into the packet. It reads questions and knows that, you know, there are 1 or 2 or 5 questions, and that's how it knows how much data to process and looking through those questions. So I'm going to go ahead and add this as a column. So I'm going to apply as column, and we have questions. Now I'm going to go to this response packet, this second packet here, and we have answer resource records. So a resource record is the answer to a DNS query, a DNS question, and I'm also going to apply that as a column. So the cool thing I now have is I can look for all my queries. So this is a query, and I see I have 1 question, and then I have a response with 2 resource records. Another question, 2 resource records. Here I have another couple of questions followed by responses with 3 and 4 resource records. So I can kind of get a sense of how much querying is being done, how much DNS querying is being done, and the number of answers coming back. There's a lot of reasons you might have multiple answers. Say you have multiple IP addresses hosted with a system, multiple additional records, so on and so forth. So we'll talk about that more when we talk about DNS later, but this is another example where you can add columns that are pertinent to the current investigation situation so that you can more quickly determine what's going on. By adding the questions and answer resource records columns to the packet list window, I no longer have to even look at the details window here, the packet details window. I can just scroll through and all that information is available. So a lot of configuration options are available to you when you start using this technique. And especially as you start dealing with new and interesting protocols, maybe ones that you don't necessarily know as much about, you'll be able to get a lot of value out of using this technique. Okay, so now just one more example, and we'll kind of call it quits for now on columns. And I want to talk about addressing a little bit, because we talked a little bit about addressing earlier when we talked about network basics, and we'll certainly talk about it more when we talk about the IP protocol and the Ethernet protocol and so on. But we know that packets are using encapsulation, right? It's a bunch of encapsulated protocols, and at different layers we have different addresses. So for instance, on this packet we're looking at, this packet 4 in this capture, we see if we look at the packet details, IP version 4, and we have source and destination IP addresses. If we go up 1, we see Ethernet, which is a layer 2 protocol, and we see layer 2 MAC addresses. So in this case, Wireshark by default shows your source and destination IP address, because that's what you're using most of the time when we're talking about network connectivity anyway. That's what you're going to be using to identify hosts. But what if you wanted to identify them by their physical addresses as well? There's a lot of reasons you might want to do this. Maybe you're concerned that an IP address of a system might have changed over time. Maybe you're concerned ARP cache poisoning is going on, and we'll show an example of that later where we'll use these columns and you can actually see MAC addresses being changed unexpectedly. So that's another reason. Or another reason is just that you have this nice little feature of name resolution on layer 2 addresses. So in this case, we have the full address here, C0, C1, C0, 17, 8C, E8. But we also, to the left of it, have where it identifies it based upon the first couple of octets as a Cisco device. On the right, we have an Apple device. This is actually just a really nice way to keep things straight in your head, and that's one of the challenges you'll have when you're doing packet analysis, is remembering which address is which host. So if you can very easily associate a device as a Cisco router or as an Apple laptop, then that's going to give you a little neat trick to be able to quickly differentiate which host is which. So with that said, why not add a couple columns that let us reference this information in line with the other information we're looking at in the packet list window? To make this happen, first thing we're going to do is get rid of these other columns we've added. So we still have the question and answer columns, and we're not going to be using those anymore. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove them. We're not going to need them again for this particular exercise. And now we're back to kind of the default look. So what I'll do next is expand the Ethernet header down here. Of course, we have the IP header, which is with our IP addresses, and then we have the Ethernet header, which has our Ethernet addresses. So I'm going to expand that, and you'll see we have both destination and source area. So I'm going to right-click on destination and apply that as a column, and then I'm going to right-click on source and apply that as a column. So we have both of those now applied and they're visible, but I don't like the area they're in. I don't like them being between info and length. I think they'd be better served between source and destination. So I'm going to go ahead and right click in here and go to column preferences, and I'm going to drag those up. So I'm going to put source right after source IP address, and I'm going to put destination Ethernet address right after destination IP address. And that automatically goes ahead and puts those in an order that I think is a little bit more intuitive for considering how they appear in terms of source and destination. Of course, if you wanted to do that a little bit differently, if you wanted maybe the IP addresses together and source and destination MAC address beside themselves, so let's say I'm going to go ahead and move source and destination MAC address down here. So we have our IP addresses first, then our MAC addresses. That's another acceptable way to do that as well. So I'm going to click OK, and we'll see we have that information now available to us, and I'll go ahead and spread it out so it's a little easier to see. Now, one thing that we didn't get when we did that, which is kind of unfortunate, is we didn't get the resolution that went along with that. So we didn't get these little helpers here that tell us that these are Apple and Cisco devices. And, well, that's a good question. Why is that? So let's go ahead and go back in here, and we'll go to Edit and Preferences and look at our columns. And we see the fields that we're using are eth.source and eth.des. So here's one thing you need to know is when you're dealing with resolved versus unresolved fields is that the resolved values actually have to be referenced a little bit differently. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and click in here into eth.source, hit a period, or excuse me, just click into here, and notice we have a couple different options. This normally uses the dot notation where you have protocol dot field dot subfield, but in this case we have underscore options, and these are just a different type of option, where in this case we have eth.source underscore resolved. So this is actually going to give us that resolve value we want. So we're going to change both of these to that field. So we're going to go ahead and change eth.dest to eth.dest underscore resolved. If I hit OK here, you see that's going to give us a much more condensed output with the little helpers we're looking for. So now we see both our Cisco device and our Apple device, and they're quite a bit easier to reference. I can tell you that the Cisco device in this case is a router. The Apple device is a MacBook. So just by adding these columns now, I can start referencing these things, these hosts I'm seeing, as the laptop and the router, which is a lot easier than trying to remember all these different addresses. Now, of course, remember, we're talking layer 2 addresses here, and Ethernet is for routing, or excuse me, for communication within the same network. So that's why you see communication out to external IP addresses like the 68.71 address, and it's showing the destination MAC address of the router on the network. So it's being internally addressed to that router, and then IP is taking over and routing that traffic between networks. And that's kind of that interplay between Ethernet and IP, which we've talked about a little before and we'll talk about a lot more later. So when you're doing this, make sure you're aware of what's going on there. But nonetheless, this is a nice way, especially if you're dealing with traffic exclusively inside your network and you want to be able to associate that to different types of devices. It's a nice little trick for doing that. So with that said, that's going to do it for our demo of showing you how to manipulate and create columns. And I want to stress again, this is one of my absolute favorite features of Wireshark. It's one that didn't always exist. So when it did come into reality and it did exist, you could add columns very easily by just right-clicking a field and adding it as a column. It was one of the greatest days of my life, which maybe shows how sad my life is. But nonetheless, it was a super exciting thing for me, and I think it's going to be a super exciting thing for you once you learn to harness that feature. Certainly, if I had a Mount Rushmore of Wireshark analysis features, the ability to add columns by right-clicking a protocol field is one of them. And of course, all the other cast of characters in terms of auto resizing or centering or left aligning things and moving the columns around and adding specific fields manually, those things are very nice as well. So make sure you learn to flexibly utilize these different columns. And as we go through different exercises in this book, very many of those exercises, I'm going to be adding columns to make analysis easier. So it should become like second nature to you to be able to use the feature where you can add custom columns in Wireshark.